E. It was supposed to be a routine drive, a simple, peaceful road trip to visit some family. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary, nothing dramatic, nothing that would change the course of my day. But as fate would have it, I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment the car stalled on that empty highway, I felt it. That shift in the air, that cold, oppressive silence that signals something far more dangerous than a broken-down engine. I tried to start the car again, but it wasn't happening. The engine sputtered, then stopped. Dead. I was stranded. With my stepson beside me, his face a mixture of concern and disbelief, I knew this wasn't just any ordinary problem. This wasn't just a flat tire or an easy fix. This was something more. The sun was starting to set and we were miles away from civilization. I glanced at my stepson, his youthful eyes wide, his nervous energy contagious. What were we going to do? It was just the two of us, alone in the middle of nowhere. And now, with the daylight fading, I could feel the tension building between us. It wasn't just the worry of being stuck, it was the anxiety of what was to come next. What would happen if help didn't arrive soon? I felt the need to call someone, but my phone? It had no signal. Of course, right? My luck, as always, was turning against me. It was moments like these when you realize how fragile everything is, how quickly a normal day can unravel into chaos. "We'll figure this out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I reached into the glove compartment for the emergency kit. But we both knew the reality. It was going to be hours before anyone could come. That was the moment I knew. We were going to have to spend the night, and that meant finding somewhere to stay. It was getting late, and we were nowhere near any familiar town. The roads were isolated, the kind of place where no one could help you, at least not for a while. My mind raced. What were we going to do? And then, as if by some twist of fate, I saw the glow of lights in the distance, a hotel, a small faded motel nestled between two overgrown trees. The kind of place you'd never stop at unless you had no choice. I knew it was the only option. As we pulled into the gravel parking lot, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and anxiety. We were here, but this place didn't look like it had been maintained in years. It was old, it was worn, but at that moment, it was our only lifeline. The bell above the door jingled as we stepped inside the small, dimly lit lobby. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't seen a breath of fresh air in years. A middle-aged woman behind the counter greeted us with a forced smile. There was a heaviness in her eyes, a tiredness that spoke of years spent in this place. "Room for two?" she asked. Her voice flat. I nodded. "Just one night. The car broke down, and we need somewhere to stay until morning." She looked us over for a moment, her eyes lingering for just a second too long on my stepson. Something in the air shifted. I could sense it, a barely there tension that hung between us. Her gaze flicked to him again, then quickly back to me. "We've got a room," she said, handing me a key with a shaky hand. "Room 7, first floor, right around the corner." I took the key, trying to ignore the way her gaze lingered. I couldn't explain it, but something felt off. The air between us felt charged in a way I couldn't ignore. When we entered the room, I immediately regretted not finding another place. The walls were stained, the carpet frayed, and the bed looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in ages. But at this point, I had no choice. I had to make do. I turned to my stepson, who was already sitting on the bed, his nervous energy palpable. I couldn't help but notice how he looked at me. His eyes were different, his gaze intense. He wasn't just looking at me with the usual childlike admiration. There was something more, something deeper. It was hard to ignore the subtle shifts in his behavior. He was older now, and his attitude was changing. I wasn't sure if it was just the stress of the situation, but there was a strange dynamic growing between us. I couldn't explain it, but every glance seemed heavier. Every moment filled with an unspoken tension. I tried to shake it off. After all, it was just the two of us alone in a strange place, and that could make anyone feel uncomfortable. But there was something else too. I could feel his presence in a way I never had before. It was as if we were in a completely different reality, one where the lines between family and something more were becoming blurry. We spent the night in the motel room, but I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could sense his presence in the room. His breathing, his movement. The tension that had been growing all day felt more intense now that we were so close. It was almost like I couldn't escape it, no matter where I turned. I woke up in the middle of the night, unable to sleep. I looked at him, lying on the bed beside me, his chest rising and falling with each breath. There was something in the way he looked at me, something almost predatory. I couldn't deny it anymore. There was a shift happening, something I hadn't anticipated. It was getting harder and harder to ignore the tension between us. I kept my distance. But even with the physical space between us, I could feel his eyes following my every move. The room felt smaller, suffocating, and despite the silence, the air was thick with something unspoken. I tried to focus on the mundane, the things that would distract me from the way he was looking at me. I moved toward the small bathroom in the corner, trying to convince myself that I was just overthinking it. After all, this was my stepson. He had always looked up to me. And I had always seen him as just that, a young man growing up in a world that wasn't always easy for him. But something had shifted. I could feel it. There was no denying the electricity crackling between us now. When I came out of the bathroom, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, his gaze fixed on the floor. The space between us felt like an ocean, and yet I could still feel the weight of his presence. I wasn't sure if it was his age, or the fact that we were trapped in this rundown room, but something had changed in him, in me. I wasn't sure what it was exactly, but I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice sounding too soft, too uncertain. He didn't answer right away, and that only added to the growing pressure in the room. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I don't know, Mom. I don't know." The words hit me harder than I expected. Mom. He had never called me that before. The weight of the word was heavy, like it carried more meaning now. The line between us was blurring, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. I had always been a mother figure to him, but now it felt like we were crossing into new territory. I didn't know what to say. He wasn't a child anymore. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't the boy I had first met, the one who was awkward and shy around me. No, this was a young man. Someone who was beginning to see the world, and me, in a completely different light. The dynamic between us had shifted, and I was caught in the middle of it, unsure of how to navigate the new reality. His eyes met mine again, and there it was. A raw, unfiltered gaze that held 1,000 questions, 1,000 thoughts. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Even though my heart was racing, he didn't answer at first, but his fingers twitched on the bedspread. His face softened, and I could tell he was trying to find the right words. "It's just, everything feels different now. The way you look at me, the way I look at you." I felt my breath catch in my throat. I wasn't ready for this conversation. Wasn't prepared for the shift that had taken place between us. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but there was no denying that something was happening. Something I couldn't control. I stood there frozen, unsure of what to say next. My mind was spinning, racing to find an answer, but I was paralyzed by the intensity of the moment. The room seemed to close in on me, the weight of his words hanging between us like a storm ready to break. He finally stood up and walked toward me, slow and deliberate, his presence overwhelming. I could feel the air shift as he closed the distance between us. My body tensed, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what he was doing, and I couldn't stop it. Couldn't stop him. His voice was almost a whisper when he spoke again. "You know, I've always wondered how you would feel if things were different. If it wasn't just the two of us in this situation." I couldn't breathe. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't know how to react to the intensity in his voice, the way he was looking at me. It was as though we were standing on the edge of a cliff, and any wrong move could send us both tumbling into something we could never escape. And yet, despite the panic rising in my chest, there was a part of me that didn't want to move away, part of me that wanted to stay there, frozen in the moment, feeling the electric current of this new, dangerous energy between us. But I couldn't. I couldn't let myself get carried away by it. I had to be the responsible one, the adult. I had to protect both of us from the dangerous path we were heading down. I took a step back, trying to create some space between us. "We shouldn't be talking about this," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "This isn't something we should even be thinking about." But even as I said the words, I could feel the pull between us. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't just about the way his eyes lingered on me. It was something deeper, something more primal that I couldn't deny. He didn't move, didn't step back. Instead, he just stood there looking at me with an expression that was both desperate and resigned. "I know," he said softly, "but it doesn't change how I feel." I wanted to say something, anything to break the silence that was suffocating us, but my words caught in my throat. How could I make him understand? How could I make him see that this wasn't just about him, or me, or even us? It was about everything. It was about family, boundaries, and the consequences of crossing them. I took another step back, this time turning toward the small, dimly lit window. The silence between us was deafening. I didn't know how long we stood there, but it felt like hours. My mind was racing, my heart a mess of emotions I couldn't quite understand. When I finally spoke again, my voice was barely above a whisper. "We need to get out of here. In the morning. We can't stay here any longer."